Welcome, everyone, to Our Whole Lives Taking Flight, and this topic today of reproductive justice advocates and people of faith. My name is the Reverend Amy Johnson, and I serve as the Minister for Sexuality Education and Justice in the United Church of Christ, and I am joined by my owl sister today, Melanie. Oh, you're muted as well.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our highly esteemed guests. I am Dr. Melanie Davis. I hold the position of OWL Program Manager for the Unitarian Universalist Association.
We'd like to take a moment this morning to, first of all, welcome you to this webinar. Thank you for being here. I know that our wonderful tech support, Laura, has asked in the chat if you can share where you're from. And if you have questions, though, today as we move along, I would ask that you use the Q&A. Before we go any further, though, we're just going to do some quick intros with our panelists, and then we'll get started with some more in-depth information. So, Kelli, would you introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning. I'm the Reverend Kelli Clement. I serve the First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis as Social Justice Minister, and also the St. Croix Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in St. Croix Falls, Wisconsin, as Contract Minister.
Thanks, Kelli. How about you, Elaina?
Hello, everyone. I serve as the Executive Director of Faith Choice Ohio. Good to be here with you all.
Great. And Ranwa?
Hello, everyone. I am the Reverend Ranwa Hammamy. My pronouns are they, them, and I serve at the Unitarian Universalist Association on the Side with Love organizing strategy team as the Congregational Justice Organizer. And I'm calling in from Oakland, California.
Thank you. And Andrea?
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. I am Reverend Dr. Andrea Vassell, and I serve as the Bishop for Global Ministries for the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries. Many of you know it as TFAM. I am also the co-chair of the governing board for SACRED, the Spiritual Alliance of Communities for Reproductive Dignity. I'm also the founder of the Wawaba Institute. It's a womanist leadership institute that is an international institute that encourages people to look at theology and reproductive justice and all of life through womanist lens. Thank you.
So as you can see and hear, we have quite an esteemed panel here today, and we are very excited about that. We have everything from local church pastors to state organizations to denominational staff and global reproductive justice advocates here. And one thing that every single person here on this webinar has in common is that we are people of faith, of deep faith, and that we look at this issue through the lens of our faith, and we advocate with our faith lens for this topic of reproductive justice, which is broad and deep and wide. And so we wanted to take some time today because we know the narrative in the media sometimes can be very different about what people of faith think and say about reproductive justice. And we wanted to lift up voices that we know of who are doing amazing, fantastic work in this area, who are saving lives and transforming lives and making the world a better place and being advocates for justice. So again, I am going to just really emphasize that if and when you have questions during this time, if you can pop those in the Q&A and not in the chat, because it's much easier for us to track those in the Q&A. And we're going to go ahead and get started with Kelli.
Well, thank you, Reverend Amy. I'm so honored to be included with this panel of powerful people who are working for reproductive justice and faith and that connection. I say frequently, because I think it's important to tell our own stories, that I'm the the mom and wife and minister and friend and daughter and citizen that I am today because I was able to have excellent professional abortion care when I needed it. And that has given me my life. It's allowed me to have the life that I have, and I want everyone to be able to have that. I think when we have an abortion story or a story of reproductive loss or reproductive challenge, when it's safe for us to tell our stories, I think it's important that we do so. So that's one of the ways that we speak our truth to the power of oppression, and one of the ways that we reduce stigma. So I just start with telling my story in that way. A few of the things to share about how we're doing the work of reproductive justice, especially at First Unitarian Society in Minneapolis. Well, let me back up and just say the frame of reproductive justice. I expect my other panelists will say it also, and I think we can't hear it enough times. I want all of us to get this in our bones so that we can just repeat it. Reproductive justice articulated first some 30 years ago by a group of 12 Black women who were responding to the Clinton healthcare plan that was, they thought to get it through a conservative Congress, they had to reduce access to reproductive rights. And Black women said, we go for healthcare, for reproductive healthcare. That's why we go for healthcare, is reproductive healthcare. And so let us articulate this frame: the right to have children, the right to not have children, and the right to raise our children in safe and healthy environments. And that made it a human rights frame, and it made all justice issues the ability to be focused toward reproductive justice. And I just am so grateful for that frame that they created. At First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, we've had a very robust OWL program for decades. We've been supportive of reproductive rights for decades. And in 2018, we were asked, would we be willing to be a plaintiff in a lawsuit that would challenge unconstitutional restrictions to abortion in Minnesota law? Minnesota has a pretty clear constitutional protection for reproductive health care. The government is not allowed to preference one pregnancy outcome over another. And so even so, many laws had been passed, 24-hour waiting period, and medically unnecessary and incorrect script that doctors had to read, and so on. And we said we would. We were challenging, from a faith perspective, the mandate that said that fetal tissue, whether the result of abortion or miscarriage, must be buried or cremated. And we challenge that from a faith perspective, saying that that assumes a level of personhood that we do not, and it is an affront to our religious dignity. There were other plaintiffs in the lawsuit. We were successful in that lawsuit. Just a few weeks after Roe fell in the summer of 2022, that lawsuit, Doe v. Minnesota, was successful. And so we removed many, not all, but many of those restrictions. And so First Unitarian Society was very proud to use our organizational and institutional strength to stand up for that. Now, we're in very blue Minnesota. It was not dangerous or difficult for us to do that, but our board had a number of conversations. The biggest question for us was not whether it was a moral issue. We were all in agreement that it was morally the right thing to do. Our biggest question was it safe to do? And what danger might we put our congregation in? So we had conversations around that and so on. But I remember one parent of a teen who had been through OWL and spoke about that, saying, I want to be able to say to my child that we did this when we had the opportunity to do so, that we didn't back away because we were afraid. And I carry that with me, and it was a very powerful moment. So I think I'll just say one more thing. There's an organization in Minnesota called Unrestrict Minnesota. It was the education campaign that came along with the lawsuit. And Unrestrict is a coalition of now 26 organizations that works on a consensus model based in reproductive justice principles. And so rather than being very top down and we're the big organization, we're going to tell people what to do, we worked on a consensus model, and it was messy at first, but now it has changed the landscape of reproductive justice organizing in our state. And it's just a joy to watch. So I love to tell that story. And I think that's enough for me. And with that, I'll pass.
Thank you, Kelli, so much. And I just want to say, kudos to hanging in there with the messy, right? Like a lot of justice work, a lot of especially work where faith and justice issues intersect is messy. And when we can stay in covenant with each other and work through the process, it can be really kind of miraculous in some ways. Yeah. So thanks for lifting that up.
And thank you also, Kelli, for mentioning the conversations that had to happen so that everybody was on board, or at least enough people were on board so that you could move forward with it. That none of this, even an OWL program, can't happen in isolation, that it requires congregational support. So thank you so much for mentioning that.
So let's move on to the esteemed Elaina Ramsey with Faith Choice Ohio.
Thank you, Reverend Kelli, for grounding us in storytelling and reproductive justice. I entered this space very much within the lens of reproductive justice, of bringing your whole self, that is a huge power of that framework. And so I come here as a cisgender woman, as a Midwesterner through and through, a first-generation immigrant, a Filipina, and all of that informs the work that I do. And some of it gets messy as well, as we've mentioned. Part of who I am is also someone who is formerly a fundamentalist evangelical. And that absolutely is why I'm in this work, because I know full well how religion is often exploited and hijacked to control people's bodies, their sexualities, and we see that oppression through and through in many of our faith communities. And so this is why I'm so passionate about this work. I lived in DC for 10 years, and then when Trump was elected, I moved back to Ohio to do this work on the ground in the states, because I know full well, again, how local laws and policies are absolutely impacting people's lives, especially if you're a person of color, if you're queer, if you're trans. And again, all of that just informs why we do this work at Faith Choice Ohio. We're the only faith-based organization on the ground that focuses on reproductive health, rights, and justice. And we do that boldly as a pro-faith organization, as a pro-family, a pro-LGBTQ organization, because there are so many clergy and faith communities who don't hear that message enough. And so the work that we do is really focused on education, on advocacy, and on direct service. And so we work in education because we know that knowledge is power. So we have a series of trainings that help people understand how we got here, what are the ways in which scripture, again, has been misconstrued to then oppress our bodily autonomy and our dignity and self-determination. And we take that all the way into teaching people about moral messaging, how to speak from your values, how to speak from a moral lens that lifts up abortion care, reproductive freedom, and all the intersections as a moral good. And most importantly, we teach about self-managed abortions because it's so essential that people know that they can have abortion care through pills. And we do that all within the landscape right now, knowing that it's not always safe for people to speak about these things, and yet people deserve, to have access to healthcare and their human rights. And so we do that educational component, knowing that that is how you start to shift hearts and minds. That is what leads people into advocacy. And so, here in the battleground state of Ohio, we went to the ballot. We're one of the few states that have the authority in which citizens can go to the ballot and try to overturn and amend their state constitution. And so last year we were able, with lots of challenges, to enshrine and codify abortion care and other reproductive rights into our constitution. And again, that was done with a lot of clergy and faith communities on the front lines. And that still continues today, because even though we may have a little bit more protections, there's still so much work to be done. We are currently focusing on overturning hopefully our 24-hour waiting period that is absolutely medically unnecessary to access abortion care. And so again, people of faith are stepping out in the public square to be able to advocate for that overturn. And then also we focus on direct service. We really are equipping congregations and faith communities through the Jubilee Fund, which is Ohio's first and only faith-based abortion fund. And we provide practical support. And that means that, even though we have some more legal protections for abortion access here in Ohio, doesn't mean that people can access that. They need wraparound support. They need the transportation coordination, the hotel stays, the meals, the childcare to be able to get to their appointments and be treated with dignity and compassion, and also with joy. And so that's what we do at the Jubilee Fund through direct service. And we also provide accompaniment through, all options. Counseling support, just to honor people's decisions, whether they decide to have children, not have children. And we also offer abortion care packages. We are excited that we've so far this year created 750 abortion packages with congregations, faith communities, both in Ohio and in Indiana, who've come together, and as a tangible expression of their faith, of the ways that they are coming together to provide a small care package to then are delivered to clinics and distributed to patients. And again, all of this work is how we change hearts and minds. It's how we shift the culture and the stigma and shame that is often put upon our bodies and our sexual identities and how we express ourselves. And that is, again, the gift of reproductive justice that allows people to enter in so many different ways to do this work.
Thank you, Elaina. I have a question in case folks in congregations are interested in doing the care package plan. Can you explain what's in a care package, and is that something that perhaps youth groups could participate in or teen groups could handle?
Possibly, yeah. So our care packages, we've developed a toolkit, and we've assembled a list of items that have been pre-approved by all Ohio clinics. And so, we're happy to help consult, support other youth groups, other programs who may be interested in doing this. But again, we do it in partnership and collaboration with a clinic, knowing that these are items that they have requested and that are patient-centered. And so we have everything from organic menstrual pads to tea for soothing. We've got gluten-free snacks, peanut-free, all of that. And the thing that makes it such a signature piece of the work that we do is that we put together a 10-page coloring book and zine that is faith-rooted, and that, again, honors the decisions that people are making. So it has lots of meditation and grounding and self-care that is a part of the zine that goes into the packages. And then, yes, so groups come together, they assemble them, and we help coordinate and get them to our local clinics. And so that's something, that we're happy to talk to with anyone who may be interested. But again, emphasizing that these are not one-off projects, that it is part of how people are then able to talk about, again, why it's so important. Why do we even do this, right? It's a way to show people that um, that we are a very silent majority in many ways of people of faith who care about reproductive justice and dignity, and yet that is often not what is heard. And so this is a way to offer a counter narrative and to offer that kind of practical pastoral support through the zine, through the items in the care packages.
It's just lovely. Thank you so much for sharing that.
It is, and I think also, as you said, that one of the important things is that you do it in conjunction with your local clinics and partnerships. So
Yeah.
I know sometimes there are some of us that are so passionate about this topic and we want to help, right? We were twos on the Enneagram and we just want to help, right? And so it's important to kind of slow our roll and make sure that we're doing whatever we're doing in partnership with the people who are already on the ground doing the work, so that we are actually supporting them and giving them what they need and not just maybe what we think,
Exactly.
they think they need. So yeah. Thank you so much, Elaina. And thank you so much, you and Kelli, both, for the work that you're doing. Incredible. And we have more. We're not done. Ranwa.
Thank you so much. I'm honored and humbled to be amongst this really fantastic group of people this morning. So yeah, I appreciate the reminder to locate myself in this conversation. So I am a Unitarian Universalist minister. I also identify as Muslim, having been raised as Muslim. And for me, the marriage of those two faiths is so critical to how I engage reproductive justice, how I engage faith, because both of those traditions, how I interpret it, how many others interpret it, really relate to the value of reason and the value of science when it comes to then engaging what is morally just. And so bringing those two lenses into this work is important to me. I identify as a non-binary parent. I have my 8.5-month-old sleeping just on the other side of the wall over here. And have a trans spouse. And so there are a lot about reproductive justice and bodily autonomy that deeply affects our family in ways that not just ground me personally, but remind me also of the privilege we have, because with all of those identities and experiences, we have still, managed to live more fully into who we are as individuals and who we are as a family in ways that we know not everybody has access to. And so I just want to sort of locate myself that way. And in my role as the Congregational Justice Organizer on the Side with Love organizing strategy team at the UUA, we held one of our most recent efforts was a Congregational Justice Organizing training series for congregations. And we held a couple iterations of that, the first in 2022 and then again in 2023. As a way to ground Unitarian Universalists and Unitarian Universalist congregations specifically in that relational work, in that intentional, faithfully motivated work around what it means to be reproductive justice advocates, what it means to be that faith voice for something that has been so twisted by other faith voices and made into this sort of false I'm not quite finding the right word for that, but just a narrative that has dominated reproductive justice, has dominated particularly abortion, and trying to reclaim a more liberative lens on that using faith. And we were so grateful to see hundreds of Unitarian Universalist congregations participate in this training and access the resources that exist to help folks understand the theological reasoning for why Unitarian Universalists are engaging or can engage, should engage in this work. Understanding the scientific and intellectual reasons, because we do love our science and our intellectualism as a faith tradition. And just blending together the heart and the mind, and coming together as individuals, as communities, being in those relationships with folks who have been doing this work for generations, and bringing that resource together as a training for individuals to start deepening the work that they're already doing or finding their entry point in community. I'll also say that our reproductive justice organizing support happens underneath our broader Uplift Action campaign, which is about bodily autonomy, and also engages not just reproductive justice, but LGBTQ justice, gender justice, and we are on the growing learning edge of disability justice as it relates to bodily autonomy, and recognizing that, just as in my own personal experience and many of our lives and in our communities, these issues are so deeply intertwined, not just in how they are under attack, but in how we can envision our liberation around. And so that knowing that how we organize on reproductive justice necessarily engages how we organize around transgender justice, queer justice, gender justice issues. And even beyond that, Side with Love has 3 other sort of issue priorities that we engage with around climate justice, decriminalization, and democracy justice. And again, the ways in which reproductive justice can be a frame for what does it mean to see decriminalization as a reproductive justice issue, or reproductive justice as a decriminalization issue? What does it mean to provide access to healthcare within prisons? What does it mean to ensure that families aren't separated at the border? What does it mean to ensure that children have access to clean drinking water, that there are no food deserts? What does it mean that we can access the ballot so that we can say we want abortion and abortion protection enshrined in our constitutions? And so how all these issues relate is a critical way in which Side with Love and the Unitarian Universalist Association engages that one entry point, recognizing that it's an entry point to many of these issues, and that they are just like I like to say, just like there's an interconnected web of oppression, there's the interconnected web of liberation. All of these are so intimately connected and necessary. And that's where I will stop for now.
I'm so glad that you mentioned the interconnections and also liberation, because so much of the work that's being done to oppress people from having reproductive choices and healthcare is the antithesis of liberation, of course. And so thank you very much for that, and for the web analogy. I love that.
Yes, and I want to thank you as well. And I also want to say that the United Church of Christ has the team that I'm on. There are 3 of us right now. It's the Gender and Sexuality Justice team. So there's myself, who does mostly our whole lives work, but there is also Dr. Sherry Warren, who is our staff person for women and gender justice. And we have a website, and I know that I think I popped that in, Laura, if you can pop that in there. So this reproductive justice is in Sherry's portfolio, and I wanted to she's on the webinar as a participant along with Rachel Ward, our team lead. And I just was texting with her, and she would like everyone to know that our reproductive justice toolkit will be available soon, and that there is also an engendering spirit, which is a sort of visual podcast situation that Sherry hosts on Frontline Faith, where they had Christian can't even talk today, ethicist Rebecca Todd Peters on, who wrote Trust Women. So that's a resource that the United Church of Christ has too. And I know that Rachel speaks often and recently for Trans Day of Visibility around some of those issues around religion and bodily autonomy and the sacredness of all humans and all of those intersections, right? All those intersections with gender and reproductive care and reproductive justice and bodily autonomy. So, and Sherry is an Our Whole Lives trainer as well. She just popped into the chat. So just know that both of our faith organizations have robust interest and resources for you around this if there are things that you're struggling with or need in order to make cases in what you are doing. And even more resources that are available, we'll move on to Andrea.
Thank you, Amy. Good afternoon, everyone. And I am Andrea. I wear a couple of hats, and I'm very, very happy to talk about them. But before I do that, I'd like to acknowledge my ancestors who are a stolen people, enslaved people. I come from a long line of very strong, resilient humans who, through the worst possible efforts, we survived, and many of us are thriving. I also acknowledge the fact that I live on stolen land here in New Jersey. I live on Lenape land, and I also want to acknowledge those stewards of the earth who were here before I got here and fostered it in a way that allows me to be here today. In my line of work, I serve as the Bishop of Global Ministries for TFAM, and TFAM is a Christian-based faith organizations, a network of churches and organizations all over the globe. And we focus on faith, and of course, we work for justice at the intersection of faith, LGBT justice, gender, and health in our global networking. We're located in Singapore, in Asia, we're in the United Kingdom, we're also in South America and the Caribbean. We're in several different places, and the intent is to make sure that all across the globe, wherever injustice raises its head and the faith narrative is stolen, that there are people there who are working for justice at the intersection of faith who can lift their voices and say no. We will stand with those who are oppressed. We will stand with those who are marginalized and minoritized. And we will stand in the voice of Jesus the Christ, Yeshua, that Palestinian Jewish man who spoke peace, who spoke love, and who spoke against oppression of his people and all peoples. And so we formed that network so wherever there is injustice in our communities, it doesn't get a chance to hide. If we are there, we will not only call it out, but we will support those who are being oppressed. And that's the work of TFAM. I also serve as the co-chair of the Governing Board for SACRED, the Spiritual Alliance of Communities for Reproductive Dignity, as I said. And SACRED is a network, it's a national network of multi-faith, multi-gender organization that does work grounded in reproductive justice, that we provide education, that education that speaks back to the dominant narrative that we have been hearing, that somehow abortion is anti-religion or anti-faith. SACRED provides theological education that says quite the opposite. And we also are multi-faith, so we also speak to the ways in which the conservative narrative around faith and laws that we are seeing that are being put in place, we make sure that people understand that not all faith, not just Christianity, but not all faith go along with that. That some of these laws are in direct opposition to the rights of our Jewish brothers and sisters, our Jewish siblings, and some other faith practices that actually sanctions abortions. And I am the founder of the Wawa Institute, humans that are amazing, that mostly are in East Africa, who are grounded in womanist theology and the ways in which womanism and womanist theology actually centers the lives of those who are most marginalized, people of color, women of color, and particularly Black women. and the things that affect us, because we also know that if there's a canary in the mine, they're the first to go down, right? And so we know that for people who are most marginalized and minoritized, unjust laws, all the things, environmental injustices, economic injustices, those affect those who are most marginalized more quickly and also more impactfully. What else do I do? I am an OWL trainer, just so I don't miss that. I am indeed an OWL trainer. I'm a very proud OWL trainer. I'm very, very happy about that. I served many, many years as a registered nurse for reproductive health, and have been at the bedside of many, many women and birthing people who are undergoing loss. I'm intimately familiar with the pain that carries, whether that loss is voluntary or not. And so all of my work comes into this place. My career as a nurse, my career as a pastor, as a reproductive justice activist, as a womanist, it all comes center because I believe that we can't have a movement or we can't talk about justice without grounding it in the lived experience of the people who we're talking about. And so in a conference I just attended in Bangkok, which was put on by the Asia Safe Abortion Initiative, Asia, and it was put on by, the conference was the Abortion and Reproductive Justice Conference. We've centered that conference in the lived experience of those who were seeking abortion. Because sometimes our movement gets really heady, right? We have all these laws and policies and marches, and sometimes we forget that the bodies, the humans that we're fighting for are real people, just as much as those who would fight against safe abortions or against reproductive justice. It gets really heady. But when you consider that the laws that you're trying to put in place, when you consider that the policies you're putting in place are affecting human beings, not just uterus on a stick, but human beings with lives, with children, with mothers, families, with fathers, who go to churches and have community, then it changes the narrative. And so that is the work I do. 2 weeks ago, Sherry and some of the other people from the United Church of Christ, we were at the Commission on the Status of Women at the United Nations. And there, the argument for abortion and for all the ways in which we are impacted by injustice, particularly in the lives of women and non-gender conforming persons, people of trans experience, it is incredible to see the work that's happening across the globe. Because to tell you the truth, what impacts us here in the United States impacts people all across the globe. The laws that we enact here trickle down to other people across the globe. But I'm here to tell you that it is encouraging, that people are fighting back, that people are in the trenches, and there is much to celebrate. I want to lift up France, that just recently enshrined safe abortion in their constitution. And it is a model that many, many countries ought to be moving toward. I'm so deeply grateful to be doing the work with these amazing people on this panel. Thank you so much for having me.
Woo! Thank you so much. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, all of you. Thank you for your inspiration and your work. I know that Melanie has a question for you all, and I have one as well. And Melanie, are you all right if I go?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I would just like to know, any of you who are familiar with OWL, and I know some of you are, and knowing that it is a comprehensive and inclusive and age and developmentally appropriate sexuality education curriculum, how do you see the intersection of sexuality education and reproductive justice? Where do you see that? How do you see those things intertwining? Anybody can go.
Well, oh, sorry, Andrea, were you going to go? I'll just say that if I were to add a fourth plank to the reproductive justice frame, the right to have children, the right to not have children, the right to raise our children in safe and healthy environments, the right to full, frank, comprehensive sexuality education is the one that I would personally add, because I think education is the way we know more about our bodily autonomy. We are the experts in our own bodies. And sometimes we just need to educate other people that we are the experts in our own bodies. But having that most fundamental sense of agency taught to our young people and our older people out of the values of our faith community, to me is, it says these are the values that we stand for, and they include bodily autonomy in all the ways that that expresses itself. Ranwa, I really appreciate the way that you expanded that frame of bodily autonomy. And so I just think the OWL education is such a key piece of that. So.
Thank you.
And if I can sort of tag onto that, I actually have a background in community health education. And one of the things that shifted me more into the sort of the advocacy and organizing element of this work was that education can only take us so far if we don't have access to the resources to put that education into action, to put that to put what we know and to actually be able to embody it with the resources and the channels available to us. And when I think about how I went to I was part of a school system that actually had a pretty comprehensive health education program. So I remember when I first, had some changes in my body, I was able to know exactly what it was and why it was. Having that access, having that education from a secular standpoint is a little bit different than when you're having it from a faith-rooted, value-grounded education, starting point. Because again, so much of what we are seeing that is challenging abortion access, that is limiting reproductive justice opportunities in our country and in our world, is using faith and value oriented language. So to be able to equip people with something like OWL, with bodily autonomy based comprehensive sex education that is rooted in our values and in our faith traditions, allows us to shift that narrative into a place where we can start to challenge what has been laid out for decades and build something new with that knowledge.
Thank you. And that's why we are so committed to supporting parents as their children's primary sexuality educators, so that sex ed becomes like a family affair if everybody can talk about these things openly, and that families can talk not only about their religious values, but about their family values, so that the young people can think critically when they're making decisions, and so that they can set and maintain boundaries. So that's all part of the comprehensive stuff. And they're not getting the same level of critical thinking necessarily in the school-based programs, especially, of course, in the school-based programs in the most restricted areas.
Yeah.
Elaina, did you want to?
Yeah, I was going to ask that.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, as someone who grew up in the fundamentalist church, that not only were we not getting this critical education at schools in a comprehensive way, but even more so in such a very twisted, toxic way in our churches, where we're taught purity culture. We're only ever taught abstinence only sex ed. And I will say that was such a detriment to myself and to so many of my peers. Did not teach me how to advocate for my body. I say that as a survivor, that all of that absolutely is so harmful. And so the transformative power of OWL, encountering that decades later, to hear like, wait a minute, there are communities in the UUC and the UA who do this, who teach it from, you know, K through 12 and beyond. That was radical for me. And I think about the principles, the things that are taught, the boundaries, you know, the value for intimacy, for consent, for mutuality, and how all of that is so life-giving, but also it walks with you through the rest of your life. And so I would love to see our legislators take OWL. You know, I've always wanted to just go to the state house, teach it to them, because they don't understand consent if they're willing to force people into pregnancy.
Yes.
And forced birth. And this is, you know, like OWL for me is, I just think, you know, I would love to see that in so many other faith communities, but also has so much to teach our schools, so much to teach our legislators. And again, everything that I've seen embodied in that curriculum is so lifelong and so valuable all the time. You know, I think about it in the ways I interact with people, with consent to, you know, hugs, to take their pictures, and so on. There's just so many ways in which the OWL teachings are valuable to how we live life together.
Thank you.
Thanks, Elaina. I have more than once volunteered as tribute to go to any legislature that would have me to teach OWL, and I know there are any number of OWL trainers who would join me. Have yet to be invited, but absolutely, absolutely. Andrea, did you wanna offer something?
Yeah, thank you for that. Because unfortunately, many of the people who are legislating, right, they themselves are living out some of the trauma they experienced and are not open and expansive in their own understanding of who they are and their body. And what I love about OWL and how it intersects with reproductive justice for me is that OWL is expansive. OWL is multi-generational. OWL takes up all aspects of our lives. For example, during my training, we visited how intersecting, what are the intersections of sexuality and race? How is that lived out in our society? How is our sexuality impacted by our cultural understanding of who we are? How is it impacted by where we live? And I think OWL touches on all these areas. And so it again, OWL centers who you are and not just think about sexuality as in something that's off to the side that we go and visit. OWL centers our sexuality in our body, in our lived experience. And that is actually what reproductive justice does as well.
Thank you so much for
Thank
that.
you. I want to just say one more thing. That Andrea and I share some having done some international work, which is so humbling. It's so humbling, and it's such a beautiful thing to do. And I had the amazing good fortune to be able to go to Tanzania and Rwanda several years ago. And I just remembering as we were doing an OWL training there, and I remember this one man sitting in the room, and just he had this light bulb go off. You could almost see it, just, you know, bing. And he was so excited because he said, "Oh my gosh, if we want youth to make good choices, we have to give them the information." And which seems so basic, right, to those of us who've done this work for such a long time. But I think there are so many people who haven't made that connection, or don't believe that. They believe that information is harmful, when we know from decades of research that that is opposite, that it's helpful, and it does help people. But it was just such a pivotal moment, and I think about that often. Go ahead, Melanie.
Well, I was going to say, I appreciate that all of our guests today have expanded the conversation to more than abortion, because the folks who are anti-reproductive justice limit it to, you know, people killing babies, people killing babies. And we know that reproductive justice is so broad an issue. And, you know, they're going after people who have miscarriages and going after people who want IVF. is the next thing. And I'm wondering how many of their personal lives involve miscarriage and IVF. We know statistically, probably quite a few. I myself had a situation with losing a desired pregnancy. And I know that if, depending on where I lived and the circumstances that surrounded it, I could have been jailed. Because when you lose a pregnancy, you aren't necessarily thinking clearly about what are the legal ramifications of whether I flush the toilet or not, right? And to expect somebody in that moment to be thinking about what's the law around this when I just suffered this loss is inhumane. So, you know, I'm hoping that this faithful work around reproductive justice brings that humanity forward, so that we are all like really focusing on what is the love here, what is the compassion, what is the reality of people needing to live their lives and grieve when grief is warranted, without being judged, without going to jail or worrying about being jailed. So, which segues me into my question: when things get dark and stormy, as they are currently, what gives you hope? What keeps you moving forward with energy to continue this work?
I'll share.
Thank you.
This gives me hope. The fact that there are people who are doing the work to ensure that those who need abortions or need to experience abortion can have them, and also that people are supported. Spiritual, emotional care is given, because whether a loss is voluntary or you know, spontaneous, a loss is a loss. But what keeps me going is meeting with humans all over the globe who are saying, hey, we are fighting for this. We want this to happen. We believe in the ability and we believe in the right for people to make choices about their bodies. And it keeps me grounded, and it keeps me, you know, going on. And I want to say also, for those people who want to join in getting more education and knowing more about what we're doing from faith and repro, please come to our sacred gathering on May 7th in New Orleans. It promises to be amazing. The Reverend Alexis Pauline Gums and is going to be one of our speakers, and you know she is amazing. So the 7th of May in New Orleans, come and join us.
Thank you for sharing that. Others?
Community absolutely gives me hope. People of you know, faith, conscience, and goodwill who refuse to let others you know, exploit our bodies, our communities, who are always pointing towards a vision of liberation. And that to me is just staying plugged in to community is essential, because hope will wane. Despair, cynicism sometimes creeps in, at least for me. And to remember that I'm surrounded by a community of folks all across the country, the globe, who are passionate about this, who are taking bold risks, who are speaking out even when it's not popular, who are connecting the dots between Palestine and reproductive justice, for one. I mean, all of that matters. And for me, especially when, you know, I'm at low capacity or whatnot, it's a reminder that I don't have to do it all, that there are others, you know, who will take the baton next. There are others, our ancestors who came before us, who paved the way. And there are those who will go before us and do the same thing. And so just a reminder of that, not just only our spiritual communities, but also the wider web and ecosystem, you know, particularly, you know, because I work so much in abortion space. There are so many abortion funds, so many networks who are doing this work. They may not do it, you know, from, you know, perhaps the same faith-rooted lens that we do, and yet they believe in the same They want to honor the agency, the bodily autonomy and dignity and self-determination of others. And so to partner with those of like mind to, again, remember, people of faith, we don't have all the answers. We're not anyone's savior, but there are people who have been doing this work for centuries and will continue to do so. And so to know your local clinics, know your abortion funds, know who is advocating for birth justice, who is fighting for access to contraception and fertility treatments, and partner, collaborate with folks. Knowing that is what keeps me going.
Thank you.
It's when you described the dark and stormy times, I immediately thought about how much I love thunderstorms. And so one of the things I think about is in those dark and stormy times, places where I find hope are the folks who are catching the rainwater in those moments, the folks who recognize that there is nourishment that we can find in those moments of that turbulence. And so I think about when I go out to actions, or whether they're direct actions, whether they're rallies, there are people who are nourishing each other in those moments, providing full meals for folks who just interrupted a senator at an action. So, there are the places where we find the care that exists in this work that we have for one another is a place where I truly find that hope and that sustainability, that it is rooted in caring for one another at the end of the day. I will just leave it there.
Thank you, Ranwa.
I love that about the people who are catching the rainwater. That's so gorgeous. Yes, to all of the things that you've said. I believe that throughout time, when there has been oppression, there has always been a resistance. There's always been a resistance, and we are part of the resistance. And there are two quotes that live in my my heart, my bones, like scripture. Joan Baez said, "Action is the antidote to despair." And Howard Thurman's quote, "Keep fresh before me the moments of my high resolve." I try to live with those two, like scripture. And in addition to the things that these panelists have said, I think those two help me each day. So that's what I'll say about it. And so grateful. And I think, just to put in another word for sacred, I think all of us are going to be there. Is that right? All of us are going to be there. So happy days. Yeah.
I look forward to seeing you all there. That'll be great. Thank you all so much. We did have a couple of questions in the Q&A, and just really briefly, I want to say, I know Melanie has typed an answer, but I do just want to say that someone asked about if some churches do Our Whole Lives for adults before they do Our Whole Lives with the children to get support. And yeah, some do, but it's not necessary. I mean, it's definitely something you can do. You can do it simultaneously. You can do it any level standalone. It's really up to you and where the energy is in your church. But in any way, it is good to have that not happen in a vacuum ever, our whole lives, to have people involved in your congregation know what's happening. And then because it's not the only time I've heard the question, I do want to say this in addition to Melanie's answer. The parent guide for K1, it does not match up to the new K1 curriculum. We do have Under Your Wing videos that do. And I don't know if you can find that link really quickly while I'm talking.
Not that fast, but if you go on uua.org and you type in K-1 videos, it's a series of 8 short, like 5 to 7 minute videos to help parents have important conversations with lots of book recommendations. We also, both of us, the UCC and the UUA, offer a free curriculum called Parents and Caregivers as Sexuality Educators. And that might be a really good offering to help parents be prepared when their children and teens come home with questions. the parents will have already thought about these issues and how they want to frame conversations with their young people. So there is a UU version and a UCC version, both from our different faith perspectives, but you can just type in parents and caregivers and you'll get to that curriculum.
I just put the UCC version in the chat, and we'll make sure we get all these resources in the follow-up email, and it will be underneath the video and to show more when it's on the YouTube playlist.
Thank you to all of our guests
Yes, thank
today
you so
and
much.
all of our listeners and later our viewers who watch this in archive. This has been such an important conversation and you're all doing such amazing work. We are so grateful for your contributions in the world and to our guests and our viewers today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Are you going to stop the recording, Amy?
I can't do it, but